you are making a mistake that could be raising your blood pressure every single day. And the worst part is, you probably think you are doing the right thing. The foods you have been told to avoid, the habits you have been following for years, may not be the full picture. In fact, some of the most well-meaning dietary choices seniors make are quietly working against them. Today, I am going to show you 5 things you can eat, starting today, that have real documented effects on blood pressure. But more importantly, I am going to explain why they work in a way that most videos never do. Because understanding the mechanism is the difference between doing something and actually sticking with it. My name is Dr. Marcus Webb, and if you clicked on this video because you are a senior dealing with high blood pressure, or you are caring for someone who is, you made the right call. This is exactly for you. Let me start with something that almost nobody talks about. Most people with high blood pressure focus on one thing: sodium. Cut the salt, lower the pressure. And yes, sodium matters. But here is what the research in the last decade has made increasingly clear. The sodium conversation is incomplete without its counterpart, the mineral that is doing just as much work on the other side of the equation. And that mineral is potassium. Here is why this matters so much, for you specifically. As we age, the kidneys become less efficient at regulating fluid and mineral balance. This means the sodium-potassium pump inside your cells, which is the mechanism that literally controls how much fluid your blood vessels hold, starts to operate under greater strain. When potassium is low and sodium is high, your blood vessels hold onto excess fluid. More fluid, more pressure against the vessel walls. That is high blood pressure, explained at the cellular level. Now, here is the part that surprises people. The average American gets less than half the potassium they need every day. Not because they are avoiding it deliberately, but because the foods richest in potassium are not the ones most prominently featured in convenience culture. So let us talk about way number 1, cooked white beans. Not a glamorous food, but one of the most potassium-dense foods you can put on a plate. 1 cup of cooked white beans contains approximately 1,000 milligrams of potassium. That is roughly 22% of what most cardiologists recommend daily for blood pressure management. It also delivers magnesium, which we will come back to in a moment, and a type of resistant starch that feeds gut bacteria linked to lower systemic inflammation. The connection between gut health and blood pressure is one of the most actively researched areas in cardiology right now. And the signal is strong. A more diverse, well-fed gut microbiome is associated with more flexible, less inflamed blood vessels. Beans check multiple boxes simultaneously, and yet they rarely appear on the blood pressure food lists that circulate online. If you are on an ACE inhibitor or an ARB, 2 of the most common classes of blood pressure medication, your doctor has likely told you to watch your potassium. That is a real and important caution. High potassium combined with certain medications can cause problems. If that applies to you, please check with your physician before dramatically increasing any high potassium food. But for the majority of seniors not on those specific medications, optimizing potassium intake is one of the highest leverage dietary moves available. Now let us talk about way number 2, and this one has generated genuine debate inside the cardiology community. Beet juice. Not beets as a side dish, though that helps too, but specifically the concentrated form, beet juice or beet root powder. Here is the mechanism. Beets are extraordinarily high in dietary nitrates. When you consume dietary nitrates, bacteria in your mouth begin converting them into nitrite. Then, in the stomach and bloodstream, nitrite is converted into nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a vasodilator, meaning it signals the smooth muscle lining your blood vessels to relax and expand. When your vessels are wider and more relaxed, your heart does not need to pump as hard to move blood through them. The result is a measurable reduction in blood pressure. Several randomized controlled trials have found that consuming 200 to 250 milliliters of beet juice daily can lower systolic blood pressure. That is the top number by anywhere from 4 to 10 points on average. For context, some first-line antihypertensive medications produce reductions in that same range. Now, that does not mean beet juice replaces medication. It absolutely does not, and I want to be very clear about that. But it does mean the effect is physiologically meaningful, not just marginal. Here is where the debate gets interesting. Some researchers have questioned whether the effect holds long-term, or whether the body adapts, and the benefit fades. The honest answer is that the evidence for long-term sustained reduction is less robust than the evidence for short-term effects. What we do know is that the mechanism is real, the acute effect is real, and for seniors with mildly elevated blood pressure, adding beet juice to a broader strategy makes physiological sense. One important practical note: beets will turn your urine and sometimes your stool a reddish or pinkish colour. This is completely harmless and called beeturia. It startles people who do not expect it. Now you do. Way number 3 is one that surprises almost everyone, and it involves something many seniors have been told to be careful with. Dark chocolate. Specifically, dark chocolate with a cocoa content of 70% or higher. The active compounds here are called flavanols, and cocoa is one of the most concentrated dietary sources of a specific subtype called epicatechin. Epicatechin has been shown in multiple studies to stimulate the production of nitric oxide in blood vessel walls through a different pathway than dietary nitrates, but arriving at the same destination: vasodilation and reduced vascular resistance. A meta-analysis published in the BMJ looked at data across multiple trials and found that flavanol-rich cocoa products were associated with a statistically significant reduction in blood pressure, averaging around 2 to 3 millimeters of mercury for systolic pressure. That is modest on its own, but remember, when you stack modest effects from several dietary strategies, the combined impact can be clinically meaningful. Now, the concern most people have is sugar and calories. It is a legitimate concern. The blood pressure benefits of dark chocolate come from the flavanols, not from the sugar, fat, or filler ingredients in most commercial chocolate bars. The problem is that many products labeled as dark chocolate have had their cocoa processed with alkali, a method called Dutching, which dramatically reduces flavanol content. The chocolate ends up darker in colour, but weaker in the active compounds that matter. When choosing dark chocolate for cardiovascular benefit, look for products that specify high flavanol content, or at minimum, choose minimally processed options where cocoa mass appears first or second on the ingredient list. A small square, roughly 10 to 15 grams, consumed a few times a week, appears to be enough to access the benefit without adding problematic calories. There is also an interesting emerging question in the research about whether the gut microbiome plays a role here too. Flavonols from cocoa appear to be partially metabolized by gut bacteria into compounds that have independent anti-inflammatory effects on vascular tissue. This is still being mapped out, but the layered complexity of how these foods work is one of the reasons reducing blood pressure through diet is not just about avoiding salt. It is about building an internal environment where your blood vessels can function as they were designed to. Way number 4 brings us to something that has been used in traditional medicine for thousands of years and is now accumulating a serious body of modern clinical evidence. Garlic, and more specifically, aged garlic extract. Raw garlic contains a compound called alliin. When garlic is crushed or chopped, an enzyme called alliinase converts alliin into allicin, which is the compound responsible for garlic's pungent smell and a significant portion of its biological activity. However, the cardiovascular research on garlic has become increasingly focused on aged garlic extract, which is a form processed over an extended period that converts allicin into more stable sulfur compounds like S-allylcysteine. These aged compounds appear to have better bioavailability and a more consistent effect in clinical settings. A systematic review and meta-analysis published in the Journal of Nutrition found that aged garlic extract supplementation reduced systolic blood pressure by an average of about 8 millimeters of mercury in people with hypertension. That is a number comparable to the effect of some low-dose antihypertensive medications. The mechanism appears to involve multiple pathways simultaneously: increased nitric oxide production, inhibition of an enzyme called ACE, which stands for angiotensin-converting enzyme, and reduction of oxidative stress in vascular tissue. The ACE inhibition angle is particularly interesting because ACE inhibitors are one of the most prescribed classes of blood pressure medication in the world. The idea that a food-derived compound shares part of its mechanism of action with a major pharmaceutical class is not magic. It reflects the fact that these drugs were often developed after observing biological effects that occurred naturally. Nature came first. Now, should you stop your medication and eat garlic instead? Absolutely not. But for seniors who are managing borderline hypertension, or who want to support the effectiveness of their current treatment, incorporating aged garlic extract as a supplement or increase in dietary garlic consumption is a strategy with meaningful evidence behind it. Fresh garlic cooked into meals still provides benefit, though potentially less concentrated than aged extract. The key is consistency. Occasional use produces minimal, measurable effect. Regular daily incorporation is what the research supports. Way number 5 may be the most counterintuitive of all, especially for seniors who have been navigating the world of diet advice for decades. Fermented foods. Specifically, naturally fermented foods that contain live cultures. Things like plain yogurt without added sugar, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut made through traditional lactofermentation, rather than vinegar pickling and miso. The gut blood pressure connection is real, and it is growing. Your gut microbiome produces a remarkable range of compounds that enter your bloodstream and influence vascular function. Among the most studied are short-chain fatty acids, produced when beneficial gut bacteria ferment dietary fiber. Short-chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionate have been shown to lower blood pressure in animal models and are now being investigated in human trials, with early results suggesting meaningful effects on vascular tone. But beyond short-chain fatty acids, fermented dairy products like yogurt and kefir contain bioactive peptides that are literally formed during the fermentation process by bacterial enzymes. Some of these peptides have demonstrated ACE inhibitory activity in laboratory settings. This is not theoretical. The peptides are real compounds with measurable effects on the biological machinery of blood pressure regulation. A large observational study following adults over many years found that regular consumption of fermented dairy was associated with lower rates of hypertension, even after controlling for other dietary and lifestyle factors. This does not prove causation, but it is consistent with the mechanistic story. Here is the overlooked reality for seniors specifically. The diversity and abundance of the gut microbiome declines significantly with age. This is not inevitable, but it is extremely common, and it is driven by factors that accumulate over a lifetime. Antibiotic use, processed food consumption, reduced fiber intake, decreased physical activity, and changes in digestive function. When the microbiome shrinks, so does its ability to produce the compounds that help regulate inflammation, vascular tone, and blood pressure. Fermented foods do two things at once. They introduce live beneficial bacteria, and they provide substrates that feed the bacteria already present. For seniors, this is not a minor lifestyle adjustment. It is addressing one of the foundational mechanisms through which aging affects cardiovascular health. Now I want to step back for a moment and give you the bigger picture, because each of these 5 foods is more powerful when you understand what connects them. Your blood pressure is not simply a plumbing problem. It is a reflection of your nervous system, your hormone levels, your immune system activity, your kidney function, your gut health, and the structural integrity of your vascular tissue, all at once. Salt restriction addresses one input. These 5 foods address the system from multiple angles simultaneously. Potassium rebalancing the fluid equation, nitrates relaxing vessel walls, flavonols and garlic compounds reducing oxidative damage and activating nitric oxide production, and fermented foods, reshaping the microbial environment that underpins the whole operation. The reason most dietary advice for blood pressure feels thin is that it is given as a list of rules without the physiology behind it. When you understand why something works, you are far more likely to maintain it. And with blood pressure, consistency over months and years is what produces lasting change. There are a few additional things worth naming before I close, because they matter for seniors in particular. First, hydration. Mild to moderate dehydration causes the body to retain sodium more aggressively, directly increasing blood pressure. Many seniors have a blunted thirst response, meaning you may not feel thirsty even when your body needs water. Regular, intentional hydration throughout the day, not just when you feel thirsty, supports the same fluid balance mechanisms that potassium and kidney function depend on. Second, meal timing and blood pressure spikes. There is growing evidence that large meals trigger what is called postprandial hypertension in some seniors, a drop in blood pressure after eating, which the body then compensates for by raising pressure at other times. Smaller, more frequent meals can smooth out these fluctuations. This is also why some people feel dizzy after large meals, and is worth discussing with your physician if it sounds familiar. Third, the timing of when you eat certain foods relative to your medication schedule can matter. Grapefruit is the well-known example. It inhibits an enzyme that metabolizes many medications, leading to unexpectedly high drug levels in the bloodstream. But other foods have subtler interactions with specific drug classes. If you are on any blood pressure medication, talking with your pharmacist about food interactions for your specific drugs is genuinely worthwhile. The bottom line is this: you do not have to overhaul your entire diet at once. Blood pressure management through food is not an all-or-nothing commitment. Add in one or two of these foods consistently, understanding why they work, and building from there is a legitimate, evidence-supported approach. The science supports gradual, sustainable change. Your cardiovascular system responds to what you do most of the time, not to what you do perfectly on rare occasions. If this video gave you something genuinely new to think about, something that changed the way you understand what is happening inside your body, please consider sharing it with someone you care about. The people in your life who are managing blood pressure deserve this information too. And if you want to go deeper on any of these topics, including the research behind gut health and cardiovascular disease, or how aging changes vascular function in ways that most people are never told about, I have additional videos that continue this conversation. Leave a comment below telling me which of these 5 surprised you the most. I read every one. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.